we need to study it. So we want to study further what can Goethe do for us. So we ask them, and we actually discuss about what Goethe can do for us. So it actually materialized at the previous year, and we discussed about the Myanmar typeface. We did research, and we did a Myanmar type design basic one. That is actually a physical event done in the auditorium, and we grouped together, and we did what the basic things that we have studied, and the Myanmar type autonomy and the classifications, and Myanmar and the difference in Myanmar and Latin languages. We talk about that.
ဆက်ပေါ့နော်ဒီကတော့ဒီပွဲကလည်းဟိုစအစီအစဉ်တော့ကျွန်တော်တို့ကဒီ type design လုပ်တဲ့လူတွေအတွက်ပို့ပြီးတော့ဦးစားပေးနေတာပေါ့နော်ဒါပေမဲ့နောက်ပိုင်းကျတော့ဟိုအားလုံးကဟိုကျွန်တော် type design နဲ့နည်းနည်းစိမ့်တာဖြစ်တဲ့အတွက်အကုန်လုံးနဲ့လည်းသက်ဆိုင်တဲ့ topic မျိုးတွေလည်းပို့ပြီးတော့ဦးစားပေးလိုက်တယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့တော့ဒီပွဲကတော့ကျွန်တော်လည်းလေးလာစရာတွေအများကြီးရှိတဲ့အတွက်ကျန်တဲ့လူတွေလည်းတပြိုင်တည်းလေးလာနိုင်အောင်လို့ဟို online ကနေပြီးတော့ကျင်းပလိုက်တဲ့ပွဲလို့ပဲပြောရမှာပေါ့နော်ဟုတ်ကဲ့ကျွန်တော်အတူရှုံးလေးပဲပြောရတော့အဲ့တော့ဟိုအပန်းကိုပြောလို့ရပါပြီစားလို့ရပါ
Okay, hi everybody. It's a pleasure to see you all. There's loads of people here. I'm very happy to see so much interest in making fonts for Myanmar. It's fantastic. Thank you to Goethe-Institut for having me, for inviting me to come along today. So let me screen share. I've got a presentation to go through. If I can find the right one to share. Sharing. Okay. Is that sharing okay? In the screen, it says your screen share. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. So I'm Ben Mitchell. I've been making fonts for various Southeast Asian scripts for about 15 years now. And quite a lot of those projects have involved Burmese Myanmar script for various languages inside Burma. I find like there's so much interest and enthusiasm in Burma, but there's not really pathways for people to learn to study about type design, typeface design, typography, graphic design so much. So many people are studying abroad or trying to teach themselves within Burma. And so I hope I can contribute a little bit today to helping people kind of make the next steps forward. I'm quite interested to know a little bit. I mean, we've got quite a lot of people here today. I wanted to know how many people among you are designers, graphic designers already. Is there a way you could put your hands up and I could see like roughly how many people are designers? Okay. Yeah, most people haven't got the videos on. Okay, yeah, there's a few. Okay. And I wonder also how many people have tried making fonts before? Is there anyone who's made fonts or tried making fonts before? Okay, just a few there. Okay. So, okay, I guess what I'm going to say today should help people not just who are interested in making fonts, but also people who are interested in typography and graphic design, which obviously are going to need to use fonts and figure out kind of the best ways to deploy fonts in different environments. I was going to start by just going through, so just to give an idea, some of the projects that I've worked on in the last few years, 10, 15 years or something. This was a recent project that we developed So Futura, most people have heard of the typeface Futura. It's installed on most operating systems by default. But normally it's just the Latin version of Futura. So Futura was a 1920s typeface designed in Europe in a very modernist style. And so it was trying to do things that were a bit unusual and unexpected in the 1920s. And the job that we had was to extend, and so various different designers were responsible for different scripts. And so there was extensions for Arabic, for Hebrew, for Armenian, for Georgian, many different scripts, including some of the Southeast Asian scripts, so Thai and Lao and Khmer, Vietnamese. And my job with my colleague Sovicet was to work on the Myanmar fonts. And so this was just published a couple of months ago with 6 different weights. You can see there's six weights from kind of light to heavy. And we'll talk a bit more about kind of the approach that I used, the process that we used to go through that. That is available for licensing now if any designers want to have a look at that. This was a fairly old project that I did maybe 10 years ago for Samsung, who needed a typeface for their for their advertising, their marketing communications, but also for use like on screen on their television sets for the menus, so people can change the controls in the languages that they speak. And so I drew the Thai, the Lao, the Khmer, and the Burmese, you can see here, to work on the Samsung platforms. So that's another one there, trying to show the kind of range of different stuff that I've been working on. This one was a bit different for Cham script, which is used in Cambodia and in Vietnam. And so this was a project that I did for Google a few years back to extend their Noto type family into Cham script. Which for this one, I didn't know much about Cham script when I started, so I needed to put in quite a lot of research time to figure out like, what do these letters look like? What are the different ways that people write them? And so I was looking at manuscripts mainly to figure out like how are the handwriting forms done and how can we translate that into digital typeface. Just a few more examples. This was the Burmese and the Khmer that we drew for Grab. So if you have the Grab app in Burma, you'll probably be seeing this typeface unless they've replaced it by now. This was a few years ago. IBM Plex Thai, another Southeast Asian script, obviously neighboring Burma. So we did 2 styles there. You can see we've got the loopless style and the looped style there, again in a range of weights. Another big project here, this was to, again, for Google to do extensions for the Noto Sans family to do a looped style in Lao and Thai, and in a range of widths from very narrow to kind of normal, and a range of weights from thin to very bold. This one's coming soon. This is for the Type Foundry Typotech, which again, we're working on Burmese. I'm working with my colleague Sovicet, who's in Cambodia. He's a very good designer and very keen on researching and programming. And so we're making quite a nice team together for this one. This is showing, this is Shani, I think, language. So another of the languages in Burma. I'm quite interested in the way that different communities, different language communities use slightly different versions of alphabets. And so my research often goes in quite complicated directions, trying to find out the ways traditionally that those communities have written their text, their manuscripts, or whatever they're writing, and then trying to translate that into digital type, because that hasn't really been done before for quite a lot of these communities. It's quite a nice challenge. And it also means that then they have the ability to communicate digitally, online, on Facebook, on texting, in different ways in their own script, in their own language. So for me, that's a really nice benefit of this kind of work. This is another one coming soon that we're working on at the moment, again for Typotech, to try and create a Burmese style that is suitable for text, but this kind of genre, this kind of style in Burmese is not normally expected to be used for text. It's more usually used for kind of big headings and for graphic design and stuff. So we're trying to find a sensitive way to make this style work for Burmese text in paragraphs, in books, longer texts. So a bit of experimentation there to make it nicely readable. So that's a bit about the kinds of projects that I've been working on over the last few years. What I'm going to present today and tomorrow, I've kind of divided the presentation into two parts. So we'll start by thinking about, okay, what actually is the purpose of fonts? How do they fit into graphic design? How do they fit into typography? What's the need for fonts? Why do I do this work? So thinking about graphic design more generally, and then going into more detail about typography and fonts and then type design. So yeah, in the first part of today's presentation, you should be able to understand, if I do my job correctly, you should be able to understand what is type design and why do I do it? What's the relevance? Then I'm going to start talking about the process of creating fonts. And I think it's important to kind of realize that every typeface designer will have a different process. Like there's not one path that everybody uses as the same approach. No, it's all completely like it depends on your personal circumstances, the way that you understand the script. So for example, my approach will probably be different from the approach that you will take because you know the Burmese script since you were born, like you have that familiarity with the Burmese script, so you probably don't need to do quite so much research. So for each person, each designer, I think it's going to be a slightly different approach, but I'll talk through kind of the main things that I do when I'm going through my process, kind of the steps that I take, from thinking about the brief, what's the typeface supposed to do, what's it for, going through my process of research and thinking about different languages that I can support. I think at the end, when I finish talking today, we'll have a questions and answers session. But if you also want to put questions in the chat, we can go through those as I'm talking. You can put questions in there, and I'll come to those at the end of the presentation today. Tomorrow we'll then look through a little bit more detail about the nitty-gritty, the process of drawing letters, getting ideas, putting concepts down, establishing the direction of the design, figuring out how we decide on different alternatives. We might have different ideas that don't work together. How do we choose which ideas work the best way? A little bit about drawing, a bit about decision making, and a little mention about the technical skills that you'll need to build Myanmar fonts. And I'll show some of the problems that we see when people try to make Burmese fonts, but they don't have all the skills that they need. So I know there's a lot of times that we'll notice problems in Burmese typesetting where the letters don't work together in the right way. So I can talk a little bit about how we can fix those things. Okay, so far so good. So yeah, the first part, why fonts? What are we doing when we're making fonts? What's the relevance? What's the importance? What's the deal here? So I guess most people have some idea of what
the graphic design ဆိုတာသဘောအခြေခံသဘောတရားတော့သိမှာပေါ့နော်အဲ့တော့ဘာလဲဆိုရင်
how does graphic design need to
graphic
use
design ကခုလို
and so graphic design generally is using different tools, different different parts of visual communication to send a message, to convey a message to the readers. And so we think about on a page, we think about the layout, we think about the text that's on the page, we think about what colors to use, we think about using white space to break things up a bit. We put images and we put text on. So that, for me, is kind of how I think about graphic design. We also want to think about the tone, the voice, the feeling of the visual communication. So what kind of mood are we conveying? Do we want it to be very fun and exciting, or do we want it to be serious and professional and businesslike? And so that's kind of an important thing to consider in graphic design, as well as kind of the more technical details of, you know, how big the font is or how big the pictures should be. So the key really is that we're conveying the messages in the best way possible, whether we want to make an impact or whether we want people to just sit down and engage with the content, to read through stuff a bit more carefully. If we're talking about a company, all of those things together will make up the brand. And so a company will have the list of brand values, talking about the colors that they use and where the logo should sit, how big to make the type, what typefaces to use, and what kind of feeling they want to convey. That's all kind of branding stuff. But graphic design doesn't have to just be for brands. We can do graphic design just for small, for individual people or for individual messages. It doesn't need to be a part of a bigger company-wide brand. So obviously a key part of graphic design is text, information. But we're not just thinking about conveying the information. We also want the text to show the reader how to read it, how to understand the message. Like, where do we start reading? Where do we finish reading? Where do we take a break in reading? Which parts are important? Which parts have a different context? How does it all work? So again, this is kind of my understanding of graphic design, and I haven't really studied graphic design. I did my qualification in typeface design, which is a bit more specialist. And so if you have studied graphic design, this might not match exactly with what you've been taught, what you've learned, or what you think yourselves. So text, generally, I think the first thing is we think about putting it into sections. We put it in blocks, we put it in chunks, so that it's not just one long page full of text all in one go. We have paragraphs, we have columns, we have different ways of laying out the text to help people read it in the way that we want them to read it. We'll use large sizes for the headings and subheadings, smaller sizes for paragraphs and details. This tells you the hierarchy, like how to understand, okay, well, this is part of this topic and this is part of a different topic. So the hierarchy tells people how to understand it, and we need to indicate that hierarchy by using different styling on different kinds of text. So this will tell us where we start reading, which part comes next, where we take a break, what the themes of the message are. The titles will tell us the themes. Margins and columns and indents will help organize the layout so that we can see kind of how to follow the reading order correctly. Other things we can do bold or italic to emphasize. But then we can also go into really a lot of detail and think about the space between lines of text. Like if it's too close together, it's going to look very crowded. If it's too far apart, it might become difficult to read from going from the end of one line to the beginning of another line if there's too much space between the lines of text. Something else is the length of the reading line. And so if you've got very short lines of text, like in a narrow column, it'll feel quite difficult to read because your eye is constantly moving down the lines. It'll be kind of tiring, I think, to read text in very narrow columns. But also, you don't want the columns of text to be really, really wide because then you've got a very long line of text to read. And it would be difficult for your eye to track to the next line if you're reading really, really long lines of text. So we've got to think about what's the best way, the space between lines and the length of the reading line. What's the best way to balance those to make text readable? And I think you have to read it when you're doing graphic design to figure out, like, is this really comfortable to read? Also, the space between letters. And this is probably slightly different in Burmese and with the Latin script or other scripts, that there are different conventions for how close together, how tightly the letters are spaced. And that's something you can adjust in your InDesign or whatever layout your app you're using. But to pay attention to that is a really good sign that you're doing a good job of typography if you can figure out how to make the most comfortable reading experience. Then looking at these details is a really good step. Okay, so all of those things together, the line length, the line height, the font size, the type style, all of these things interact in a type system, which the process is typography. We're doing typesetting. The aim of typography is not always the same. And so if you're creating like a movie poster or a billboard advert or something, you want to grab attention, you want to have impact. And so typography has a different aim there than if you're typesetting a novel. If you've got a book, a manuscript that you're converting into a book, you want to figure out, okay, we don't want every word to make an impact on the reader. We just want them to get on with reading and take things a bit more carefully and absorb the information without the letters kind of shouting or showing off. And so different kinds of typography are needed for different kinds of purposes. And also that means we're going to need different kinds of fonts. And so this is kind of getting a bit more specific about why fonts. We can see typography has different aims, so we're going to need different fonts, different tools to use there. So yeah, the classic example would be like a party invitation needs to be fun and exciting. Contrast that with like a dental practice or something that needs to be a bit more serious. We probably don't want to use the same fonts for both kinds of things. But we also need, within a typeface family, we probably need different styles. So we probably need a regular and a bold, maybe an italic. For different kinds of content, think like I was saying about showing the hierarchy, there'll need to be different styles to show readers, okay, this is more important, or this is a different kind of content. Maybe this all needs to be in italics, or maybe this needs to be in a condensed typeface or something. So, for example, in a newspaper, you'll see kind of very big, bold headline fonts, some probably condensed headline fonts because they're trying to fit quite a lot of words into a column. Different kinds of content are going to need different font styles. One thing I've seen where a lot of fonts in Thailand, in Burma, in Laos don't have many styles in the type family. And so you tend to see people using underlining or different colors of text to kind of show, okay, this is a different kind of thing. It's because there's not that range of type yet. People have to rely on other ways to indicate, okay, this is a different kind of article, or this is the headline, this is more important. And so 3D effects or word art or stuff, people are using all sorts of funny tools because they don't have the range of fonts that are needed. There's also the question about if you're typesetting different languages, if you've got an app that needs to work in Burmese and English, or if you're advertising in different countries, you'll need to find a font that has those languages, that can support the languages, that has both of the scripts included in it. Because if you've got one font for Thai and a different font for Burmese and something else for English, you're going to have problems with, okay, one script might look too big or too small next to the other one. You've probably seen the kinds of difficulties that happen if you haven't got a font that has both languages included. And so this is kind of a motivation for typeface designers to think about, okay, how can we give a better experience when people switch between languages? We want them to have some consistency in the font between those different languages. So yeah, graphic design requires typography. So thinking about those items that I mentioned before, typography then needs type designers, and the jobs of the type designers are to create new fonts that can help the different brands articulate their text in different languages, update fonts to include new languages, and also improve the quality and functionality of existing fonts. This is a thing that I notice in Myanmar fonts, that there's quite a lot of very old fonts that are still used, and so it's quite nice when type designers would get the opportunity to improve or redraw or go back and think about, okay, these fonts were designed 30 years ago. They don't have the quality that we expect today, or they don't have the functionality that we expect today. Maybe they don't work on modern operating systems. Maybe they don't include all the characters that are needed for different languages. So there's always many, many more challenges, especially in Southeast Asia, many challenges and opportunities to do more interesting contemporary versions of fonts or create new ones. So type designers, this is me. Type designers will be interested in giving typographers new options on their font menu, solving problems that other fonts don't address. I guess there are two main ways, two main categories. The first would be, okay, I've got an idea in my head that I want to explore. I've imagined a new kind of font that I want to create. The other possibility might be a client who comes to me and says, okay, we need a font that can do this and looks like this, and we can use it for this. And so the client will come to me with an idea for a new font or to extend an existing font. But I think both of those categories, we'll kind of approach them in the same way. Oh yeah, also sometimes designers are looking for a font that they feel like it wants to be something like this or it wants to be something like that. But they can't find the font that they need. And this is quite a common motivation for people to start making their own fonts. I can't find the font that I need. Let's try making a font. And so this is kind of one way that people get started in making fonts in type design. Okay, so I think we have covered like the basics. What are typography and type design, how they fit into graphic design, what is the need for new fonts. But if you have any questions, then do write in the little chat, or we can ask questions at the end, do a Q&A at the end. So next I'll talk about the process that I go through when I'm starting to make fonts. Defining a brief, what does that mean? So we want to establish at the beginning of a project, like what is the purpose? What is the need for this project? Why are we making a new font? What does it have to do? This is going to help us think about the design when we're having ideas about it. And it also, if we have a nice strong brief, it'll also help us to weigh up the different options and make judgments about, okay, does this match the brief or does something else match the brief better? And so having that kind of framework of a strong brief helps us to judge the work that we're doing and gives us the best results. So this for me is a really kind of key part of it, defining the brief with the client usually. So these are the kinds of questions that I would ask. And again, whether I'm talking to a client or whether I'm creating a font based on my own ideas, I need to know, what's the font going to be used for? Is it something that we want to use really big sizes on a poster to make an impact, to draw attention? Or is it something that's going to be used in longer text, in a book, in a dictionary, in a newspaper, a magazine, or on a website where we just want people to read it? And we don't really want the words to stand out. We want the meaning to go in for people to understand stuff. So the size that it's going to be used at, the environment, is it going to be seen on screens? Is it going to be printed on newspapers? That will make a difference to the kind of choices that we make as we go along. So we're thinking here about the function. What's the function of the typeface? What's it going to be used for? The next kind of thing that I'll look at is, what kind of personality does the typeface want to have? So going back to what we said earlier about graphic design, what kind of mood and voice and tone are we aiming for? If the company has a brand, then we want to look at the brand values and figure out, okay, are they trying to be friendly and contemporary? Or are they trying to be more serious, old-fashioned? Like there's different ways that a font can feel, and it's going to need to match the brand, or it's going to need to be defined if you're creating your own typeface. Are we doing something experimental, something fun, something scary? Like there's so many different ways, and I find like adjectives here are really, really helpful. Just to make a big long list of adjectives to convey, to establish what the typeface is trying to convey. So we're talking about the feeling of the typeface. This will help you pin down what kind of shapes are working best to take the design in the direction that you want. And then the other part of it, I guess, is how can we describe the shapes that we're seeing? Is it a wide or a narrow design? Is it angular or flowing? Is it bold? Is it light? Is it... There's so many different shapes that we can describe, and it's useful to kind of put those down on paper and think about, okay, these are the forms that we're going to use. It's going to be this style of typeface. Are the letters round or square? Is it a design that looks a bit like Latin? Does it have serifs? Does it have loops? Does it have stroke contrast? Does it have thick strokes and thin strokes? So when we put those, when we put those on paper, here we're talking about the forms, and so we're talking about the shape of terminals, we're talking about the apertures, the counters, the quality of the curves. We're talking about, okay, there's a bit of thinning of the stroke where the strokes join together. They're not all the same thickness. The vertical's heavier than the horizontal. And we're talking about the width. And so those things, all thinking about the form of the letters, for example. The feeling, there's just some adjectives that I came up with when I was creating this one in the Latin. And so using those same adjectives, then we can transfer those ideas into other scripts when we need to. So that all together, we've got the form and the feeling and the function, three really important parts. I've got, this is kind of the framework that I use when I'm kind of establishing what the design needs to do, what the brief is, a form, feeling, and function framework. So that's going to be useful to guide our explorations and to help us check what we're doing kind of matches, everything matches together. This part is more to do with getting familiar with different scripts, but I think it's also relevant when we're working on our own scripts. We want to understand maybe the history of the script or the different styles that exist for a script. What are the categories or the genres that exist for a script? It's not always the same with different scripts. And so the different styles that we see in the Latin script don't really have much relation with the different styles that we see in Thai or Burmese or Khmer. So we have to know kind of what genres exist for the script that we're working on, and to know what those genres are used for. Do they have particular references that if I'm doing, for example, let's say a black letter font, a fracture font in a very kind of medieval style in the Latin script, that's going to have a very different effect than if I'm doing a contemporary geometric or humanist Latin typeface. And so we need to understand where those genres came from and what they tend to be used for if we want to make a successful typeface. In any script, we need to know kind of what those categories are. And then within those categories, what are the different ways that we can interpret the letter forms? There might be different structures that are possible for some letters. We need to kind of have a reference library in our head of the different ways that we can interpret the letter forms. And this is really difficult if you're approaching a new script. How do you understand what can be done with each letter form? You need to have examples. You need to go and look really carefully. But I think even in our own script, there might be things that we don't know, that we haven't really thought about, we haven't looked at before. But this paying attention to these differences can really strengthen our understanding of the letter forms. So my approach here is like, take your camera, take your phone with you everywhere you go and take pictures of letters, of words, of type. And yeah, go to as many different places as possible. So for example, when I've been traveling around in Burma, I'm always keeping my eyes open, taking pictures of all the lettering that I see, because that might give me some ideas for the future. It might help me understand the letter forms a bit better when I see all the different styles that people use in different places or not in different techniques. And so we've got letters made of metal, made of wood, painted on different kinds of surfaces. So all different kinds of lettering. But also in Burma, there's this lovely tradition of like mosaic tiles to create letters. And so this can teach us something about how letter forms are constructed. Like, I don't necessarily think I want to make a font in this style, but it's very useful to understand how people design letters using kind of blocky elements, little bits of mosaic to piece together. Like, what are the proportions? What are the sizes of different things? How can we create letter forms out of kind of granular bits and bobs? Stuff like the LED lights and pixel displays and stuff, some of them not as successful as others. But again, it can show us like, how can we create nice letter forms when we don't have a very good resolution, like the LEDs is only maybe 5 pixels, 10 pixels for each letter. And so how can we understand what needs to be preserved in the letter forms when we don't have a very good resolution? And so all of my archive is online on Flickr on that link, and everyone's very welcome to go and have a browse through and understand, like, get some ideas. Also, more historic stuff, I think, like, for me, this is super interesting and relevant. Like, where did the letter forms come from? Why did they end up the shapes that they are today? Where did that happen? Why did that happen? What was the evolution? And so looking through, some of these are quite old inscriptions, maybe going back to the 10th, 12th century. Some of them are more contemporary, 19th and 20th century stuff. But seeing kind of the progress of the letter forms through the centuries has really helped me kind of understand what are the key parts of each letter. And for me, it's super interesting, all this research stuff. Also manuscripts, yeah. Handwriting and calligraphy and stuff, different ways that people use the script. So again, this relates back to the question of the genres. So different mediums of communication have made different genres of letter exist. So in handwriting, it's obviously a pen and ink. But then some of the older handwriting is like on the Parabite here, it's just done with a kind of monolinear pencil thing. And then these are painted in the Magi Z letter forms, painted on the manuscript. And so this really relates back to, okay, what are the different genres? What are they used for? And also makes me wonder about, well, why did they evolve in that shape on these different surfaces? So a lot of very interesting research questions. But visually also very useful to understand the letter forms and give ideas for new fonts and stuff. Okay, so yeah, we're building familiarity with the genres and with the letter forms. If we've got something like a photo archive like this, well, when I'm making new fonts, I tend to look through the archive and see, okay, is there anything there that might fit the brief that I've defined? Is there any ideas that I can use, or can I translate some of those ideas? Can I experiment and make something new from those ideas, or can I put different ideas together into a new typeface design? And so having that archive is a really very useful thing. But I'll also think about, okay, well, what ideas do I have already in my head? I don't need to look at archives the whole time. I'm going to have some ideas of my own to start on research. I think this is the last thing that I was going to talk about today. That when I'm making fonts, I'm very aware that there are a lot of languages spoken in Burma and in Thailand and in Cambodia. I want my fonts to support people in all of those communities. I don't want to say, well, Burmese language is the important language, I'll just focus on Burmese. No, that sounds a bit judgmental. I want to include as many different languages as I can do. And so this is where research comes in. This is a manuscript from Thailand written in Mon language. And as you can see, like, quite a lot of these letter forms are a bit weird, that they don't follow the Burmese shapes. And so studying this kind of stuff, this is from the British Library Endangered Archives Programme, studying the letter forms that different communities use means that then I can include those preferences in the fonts that we make. And then therefore those communities have fonts that represent or follow kind of what their expectations are. Another example here, so this is Shani language spoken in northern Burma, I think Myitkyina state, I'm not completely sure. But we can see the handwriting style or the letter shapes are really quite different from what we expect when we read Burmese. So this is still Burmese script, it's just unique letter forms for different language groups. And the way that I tend to research this is I'll reach out to either academics who study these languages, who go and talk to the local communities, or I'll reach out on Facebook directly to people in those communities. Maybe somebody has posted a picture in a Facebook group where that community is discussing manuscripts or their culture, and they're often very interested in fonts, including their languages, or their orthographies, their preferences for the writing into new fonts. And so this is a big area for me to explore and to find out what do people really want in their fonts. I think what we'll do is I think this was going to be covered tomorrow. So if I stop there for now, and see if we've got any questions, and then we can come back tomorrow. We're about halfway through the presentation. We can come back tomorrow to a bit more of the details on creating the design with that background knowledge that we've got, the research that we've got. So I'm going to stop the sharing and see where we're at.
So Ben, there are some questions in the chat. Will you please read and answer?
Of course, yeah, thank you. I've just noticed. So yeah, I see. Oops, here we are. Let's see. So I can make this a bit bigger. Good. Okay. So first question from Michael. Thank you for your question, Michael. We consistently face a one-way street issue with Burmese Unicode. Creating a PDF works perfectly, but converting it back to Word destroys the text. Could you explain in technical terms what is happening to the Unicode map during the PDF creation process? Is this primarily an issue with how the PDF stores the visual glyphs versus the actual character codes? Yes, I think one possible issue, I mean, there could be many problems. There's quite a lot of layers of technology that have to all work together for text reconstruction from a PDF. One of the things that could be wrong, and I think this might be the main problem, is that the glyph names in the font need to be in the correct format. So when we, I wonder if I can share a font, let's see, in a font editor. 1 second. Let me go back to sharing. Okay, is that sharing? Yeah, I think that's sharing. So when we're working on a font, let's make this a bit bigger so you might be able to see the names of the glyphs. They're not getting any bigger. You might be able to see there, I've got the font names written in this format. So we've got Nga Myanmar, Ja Myanmar, Cha Myanmar. When I export, those names should be converted to the Unicode number. So when I open that font, let's do this and have a look at example. When I'm exporting the font, what I want to see here is actually not Ka Myanmar, that won't help the PDF convert. But let me find a font where the names are in the right format. The font names here have been converted to Unicode numbers. And that's a really important part of when you're copying text from a PDF. It's actually looking at the Unicode, the names of the glyphs, which need to be in that format for them to be converted correctly back into a Word document. I think this is not something that I have looked into very much. What else could be going on? If it's a Unicode font, converting it back to Word destroys the text. Yeah, I would say it's probably a font problem. Try it with, so this font is Myanmar Text, which is the default font on Windows. That shouldn't have that problem, but if it still does have that problem, then it's probably an issue with the way that the PDF is storing the visual, like you say, the visual order of the glyphs rather than the actual characters. Yeah, I can't answer that very definitely, I'm afraid, but yeah, I think that's what's going on there. Okay, next question. In the context of the AI era, LLMs need massive amounts of clean data. If our digital archives are locked in these corrupted PDFs, are we at risk of creating a data gap for Burmese and ethnic languages? How significant is this barrier for training future AI models for our region? I think that it's a huge problem. I think especially for minority languages like Shan or Karen languages, there's just not enough data. And so the data that they have is probably not very clean data, just because there's not very much of it, that they have to rely on what exists, and that might not always be correct. So I think, yeah, this is going to mean that the languages of Burma are lagging behind quite significantly. I wouldn't really trust AI responses in Burmese language or any of the languages in Burma at the moment. There needs to be a lot of work, especially like with the problem of Zorji, that was only in the last maybe 5-10 years that people have switched over to Unicode. That it's creating kind of barriers, like you say. For the many educators and staff here today who have limited budgets, the reliance on paid OCR tools is not sustainable. Apart from keeping the original source files, what is the most reliable low-cost workflow you would recommend right now for extracting text from these PDFs? That's not something that I've had to do. I make the fonts, and I hope that that's going to work correctly. From what you're saying, it sounds like this is quite a big problem that I need to look into more, to understand the difficulties of converting from a PDF back into plain text. I haven't really come across OCR tools. I know there was one really bad example on, I think it was a Kindle, that someone had tried OCR, but the OCR didn't realize that it was in Burmese. And so it translated it all into English letters. And so it was like C's and O's and M's and stuff. It had just converted it into Latin letters that looked similar shapes to the Burmese letters. Again, I think this is another area where the languages of Burma are really needing more attention. I don't know if maybe there's some projects on GitHub or somewhere that people can get involved and help out with OCR tools. That might be something to look into to try and improve any tools that are kind of public, open source. If you could give one piece of advice to the government offices or NGOs issuing these reports, what steps should they take to ensure the PDFs they publish are healthy and accessible for everyone? If you could give one piece of advice to government offices or NGOs issuing these reports, what steps should they take to ensure the PDFs they publish are healthy and accessible? Oh, this is not really my area, I'm afraid. I think, like, what steps they should take. I mean, obviously using Unicode is the basic step. I'm assuming that most people have converted to Unicode fonts already and Unicode keyboards already, but that might be a recommendation if there are still people who are using Zorji fonts or older fonts with different encodings. That should eliminate some of the problems. Yeah, maybe this is something we can test a bit more with the fonts that we're making to make sure if there's anything else we can do to help PDF extraction. Okay, next question. I was wondering about the stereotypical and genre-defined usages of typefaces. For instance, a serif font would be generally perceived as something formal and serious compared to sans serif, which feels more casual and free. Does it have to do with cultural and historical context, or are we just cognitively trained by previous works to understand it the way it is? Could you maybe explain or give your perspective on where the lineage of this idea stemmed from? Okay, well, I think each script has developed, like we saw on the presentation, we saw square Burmese and round Burmese and thick Burmese and thin Burmese styles. I think each script has its own traditions. And I think if we can understand a bit of the historical context, we can see, okay, where did those styles come from? Normally, it kind of depends on what tools and surfaces people were writing on, which would have an effect on the forms of letters. And so in the inscriptional in the inscriptions that we saw, the very square style of Burmese, that's because the stone surface is quite hard to make when you're bashing your chisel into the surface of the rock. It's quite hard to make curves. And so the inscriptional style kind of made the alphabet have this more square form. When we come to manuscripts, especially palm leaf manuscripts, you're trying to write on quite a difficult surface on a palm leaf with a little stylus balanced on your finger. And it's only really possible to make curves with that stylus. You can't really make a straight line very easily. And so this is kind of the reason that Burmese letters ended up being so round after the manuscript style. And so I think if we can understand like the derivation of those genres, we can understand, okay, well, here's why they're used for those kinds of situations today, or why people are inventing new styles or how they're doing that. So yeah, it definitely has to do with the historical context. I think also, like you say, there's something about what we are familiar with reading. And so the nice example in Thailand is the looped and loopless styles. And generally for longer texts, historically, there's been more of a convention to use looped Thai typefaces. But then, since the 90s, early noughties, the loopless style has become much more popular. And so the younger generation is now finding the loopless style easier to read in all situations. And so it totally depends on who we're talking about and what they're used to reading. So the younger generation are much more familiar with the loopless style because it's only become popular while they've been alive. But the older people still don't read it quite as easily as the looped style. And so, yeah, we need to look at kind of the history, where did those styles come from, but also who are we talking about? Who is reading this and what is their preference? What is their exposure to the different styles? So yeah, absolutely both elements there. This final question is in Burmese, and I can't read it. Why is it translated into Burmese?
Oh, it is the same. Just translate.
Oh, okay. I see. Okay. So I think we've done the questions then, right?
Yeah. Oh, so, good tool lah. Good tool ba me mo.
ဟုတ်တယ်ကျွန်တော်ကအတန်နဲ့မေးချင်လို့ပဲလက်ထောင်ထားတာပေါ့နော်စာနဲ့မေးထားတဲ့လူတွေဦးစားပေးလိုက်တာပေါ့ဟုတ်ကျွန်တော်ကတော့ကိုထူးပါတင်ဝင်းထူးပါကျွန်တော်က language fee ရလာတာပါ linguistic လို့လည်းပြောလို့ရတယ်လို့ပေါ့နော်ဒါပေမဲ့အဲ့ဘက်ကိုအရင် professional သွားထားတာတော့မဟုတ်ပဲနဲ့ကျွန်တော် language fee ရလာတာပေါ့နော်တော့ဒီ typeface ဒီ font တွေကကျတော့ကျွန်တော်2008ခုနှစ်လောက်ထဲက photography တို့font creator တို့ပါလို့ကျွန်တော်စမ်းဘူးတယ်နောက်ဆုံးကျွန်တော် let short လိုက်တယ်ပေါ့နော်ကျွန်တော် fee နဲ့ကအရန်ဝေးတဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်ကျွန်တော် let short လိုက်တယ်ဒါပေမဲ့ကျွန်တော် language fee ရလာတာminority language ကိုကျွန်တော်က focus ပို့ထားတာပေါ့နော်ဆိုတော့မြန်မာ font လို့ပြောလိုက်လို့ရှိရင်ကျွန်တော်တို့အများတန်းကြံခဲ့တာကမွန်ကရင်ရှမ်းအားလုံးကြံခဲ့တယ်ကုန်းပြောရလို့ရှိရင်ဗျာအစိုးရပေါ့နော်အစိုးရလို့ပဲသုံးပါမယ်အစိုးရကကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီအစိုးရသုံး font လုပ်တယ်မြန်မာ3လုပ်တဲ့ချိန်မှာအားလုံးခြံထားခဲ့တယ်ကျွန်တော် Unicode ကို2008ထဲအစသုံးနေတာအကုန်ခြံထားခဲ့တာအကုန်ခြံထားခဲ့တဲ့အချိန်မှာကျွန်တော်မခံစားနိုင်ဘူးဆိုတော့ကျွန်တော်လုပ်တယ်နောက်ဆုံး2015လောက်ပေါ့နော်2012လောက်မှာလမ်းစာပေါ်လာတယ်2015လောက်မှာကျွန်တော်တို့ MUA group ပေါ့နော်မြန်မာ Unicode community ဆိုပြီးပေါ်လာတယ်အဲ့အချိန်မှာအကုန်ပါအောင်ဆိုပြီးကျွန်တော်စူးစမ်းတဲ့အချိန်မှာကိုစန်ထွန်းဆိုတဲ့ပုံကနေပြီးတော့သူကမြန်မာ font ကိုလုပ်တယ်လုပ်တဲ့အချိန်မှာကျွန်တော်တို့ကဒီဘက်နောက်ကလိုအပ်တဲ့ဟာပေါ့နော် language support ကိုလိုအပ်တဲ့ဟာအကုန်ဖြည့်တဲ့အချိန်မှာမွန်ပါလာတယ်ရဟန်းတော်တစ်ပါးကြားဖို့မဲ့ထင်ပါတယ်အနန္တဆိုပြီးတော့ပေါ့နော်အနန္တပေါ့နော်မွန်လို့ဆိုရင်အနန္တဆိုပြီးတော့သူရဲ့နောက်ထပ်လူပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တစ်ယောက်ရဲ့ပေါ့နော်နှစ်ယောက်က keyboard လုပ်တယ် font ပိုင်းကတော့ဒီဘက်ကျွန်တော်တို့ MUA ကနေပြီးတော့ပေါင်းပြီးလုပ်ကြတယ်ပေါ့နော်ကရင်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်အရှိပိုးကင်နောက်ပိုးကင်ပြီးတော့စကောကင်ကျွန်တော်ပါခဲ့တယ် language fee ကနေပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်အများကြီး feedback ပေးခဲ့တယ်ပြီးတော့ရှမ်းဆိုလို့ရှိရင်လည်း sign something ပေါ့နော်2ယောက်3ယောက်လောက်ပါတယ်အဲ့လိုမျိုးချင်းပေါ့နော်အခုလက်ရှိလည်းပဲရခိုင်ဘက်ကခူမီတို့ပါလို့ဆိုလို့ရှိရင် language ကုတ်တောင်မကြသေးတဲ့ဘာသာစကားတွေရှိတယ်တချို့ကြတော့လည်းပဲအင်္ဂလိပ်လိုပါရှိပြီးသားအင်္ဂလိပ်လိုနဲ့ဥပမာပြောပြမယ်နော်ဂေဘာတို့ဘွဲတို့ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ငကိုတွေကအင်္ဂလိပ်လိုနဲ့ပေါင်းကြတာဟာစကောကင်ရှိတာပဲငါတို့မှာအခရာရှိတာပဲဘာကိစ္စနဲ့အင်္ဂလိပ်လိုပေါင်းမှာလဲစကောကင်ကိုပဲယူသုံးမယ်ဆိုတော့စကောကင်မှာအတန်းမရှိတော့အခရာလေးနှလုံးလောက်လေးပဲထပ်ထည့်ပြီးတော့ဂေဘာဆိုပြီးထွင်လိုက်တော့တခါဂေဘာပေါ်လာတယ်ထပ်ဖြည့်တာမှမနိုင်တော့ condition တို့လိုဟာမျိုးကြတော့မြန်မာနဲ့ကလုံးဝချွတ်စွတ်ကြီးမြန်မာအခရာကိုသုံးတာလည်းမဟုတ်လုံးဝချွတ်စွတ်ကြီးတခြားအခရာကိုသုံးတာလည်းမဟုတ်ဆိုတဲ့ဟာမျိုးတွေကြတော့တီးခြားခွဲထုတ်လိုက်ရတယ်မြန်မာထဲမှာထပ်ထည့်လို့မနိုင်တော့ဘူးမြန်မာတော့ extension က2မျိုးဖြစ်သွားပြီနှစ်ခါရှိသွားပြီ extension A ရယ် extension B ရယ်ဆိုတော့မြန်မာ font ထွင်လိုက်ပြီးဟေ့ဆိုရင်မြန်မာပြီးတတ်မယ်ကုန်းပြောမယ်မြန်မာတော်မှမြန်မာပြီးတတ်ပါဠိအတွက်တော့မပါဘူးအဲ့လိုဖြစ်နေတဲ့ပြဿနာမျိုးတွေရှိတယ်ပါဠိအတွက်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်တကယ်ပါဠိမှာမှတကယ်ရှေးပါဠိတွေ
Yes, the classical Pali for those who created the Myanmar font, they are not familiar with it. For example, under Nange, there's the Tawambu, but there's a small thing added to it. So very difficult to do it correctly. Of the 100 fonts, 90 are not correct. So under Nange, like if you put a website under Tasidu, it doesn't exist at all. Only if you use Moon font, it will work. So the one that the font that is invented by the monk, like in Google, the Myanmar Type is not totally not correct.
ဝေးကိုဝါဆွဲထည့်ပိုးတောင်ဆိုသေးတယ်ရှိကုန်မရှိဘူးအဲ့မွန်လူမျိုးထွင်တဲ့ဟာကြမှာပဲရတော့တာပြီးသွားလို့ရှိရင်တာတလင်းချိတ်ပတ်စင်ကိုတာတလင်းချိတ်ကိုတာတလင်းပတ်စင်ဆင်တဲ့ဟာမျိုးနော်အနားငယ်ကိုဓာတ်ရင်ကောက်ဆင်လို့ရှိရင်အလျားလိုက်ကြီးဖြစ်နေတယ်ဒေါင်းလိုက်မရှိဘူးဆိုတော့မွန်တို့ရှေ့ပိုးကင်တို့ကြတော့သူကဒေါင်းလိုက်လေးလိုချင်တယ် ဆိုတော့ logic အရာသူတို့ဒီ font ထွင်ထားတဲ့ logic အရာမှန်တယ် rendering မှာလိုနေတာပေါ့နော်အဲ့လိုမျိုးဟာမျိုးကြီးဆိုတစ်လုံးတည်းတစ်ခဲတည်းမှာပါမနေဘူးဆိုတော့ဘန်ကိုကျွန်တော်သိတာတော်တော်ကြာပြီ2015တည်းကသိတယ်2018မှာသူ့ရဲ့ဒီဘယ်လိုခေါ် passionate ဖြစ်တဲ့ဟာကိုကျွန်တော်အရန်အားကြတာအရန်လည်းကျေးဇူးတင်တယ်တကယ်ပါဘန်ကိုဒီချိန်မှာကျွန်တော်တွေ့ရတဲ့အချိန်မှာသူကျေးဇူးတင်စကားပြောခြင်းနဲ့ appreciation လုပ်ချင်ပါတယ်သူ့ရဲ့ passionate ဖြစ်မှုကအရန်ကြောက်စရာကောင်းတယ်ကျွန်တော်ကတော့ပြန်ပြီးတော့ inspire ဖြစ်ရတယ်ပေါ့နော်မကြီးစိတ်ကမ္မဝါဆိုတာမြန်မာလူမျိုးတွေကြားဘူးတဲ့လူတော်တော်နည်းလိမ့်မယ်မကြီးစိတ်ကမ္မဝါကိုသူပြန်ပြီး design ပြန်ထွင်တဲ့ဟာကျွန်တော်တကယ် appreciation ဖြစ်တယ်မြန်မာလူမျိုးတွေတောင်တော်တော်တန်တန်ကြားဘူးလိမ့်မယ်လို့မထင်ဘူးပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒါကိုသူကfont typeface တွေလူလောက်တယ်ဆိုတော့မကြီးစိတ်ကမ္မဝါဆိုတာဟိုကိုရင်ဝက်မှဟလာလားကိုရင်ဝက်တာတော့မှမန္တလေးဘက်တို့ဘာတို့မှဒါတကယ်ကိုရှားပါတယ်အဲ့လိုဟာမျိုးကိုသူလုံနိုင်တယ်ပေါ့နော်ပြီးတော့ဒီအရှိပိုးကင်ရဲ့ numbering system နော်ပို့ numbering system 4-5 ခုလောက်ကိုသူကုတ် point ရဖို့အတွက်ကိုသူစ조사တယ်တကယ်ကိုကျေးဇူးတင်တယ်ကျွန်တော်အဲ့ဒါကိုတောင်းဆိုနေတာ2012ခုနှစ်ထဲကတောင်းဆိုနေတာမြန်မာလူမျိုးတွေတယောက်မှ appreciation မဖြစ်ဘူး2015မှာထပ်တောင်းဆိုတယ်မရဘူးမင်းဟာအရန်သုံးတာနည်းတယ်မရနိုင်ဘူးကျွန်တော်တောက်လျှောက်စောင့်ကြည့်တယ်2023-24လောက်မှာပေါ်လာတယ်အရန်ကျေးဇူးတင်ဘန်လုံးဝ I really appreciate your effort on Eastern Bokin numbering system for numbering system I really appreciate to you ကျွန်တော်ရှာနေတာကြာကျွန်တော်ရှာနေတာကြာပြီမြန်မာလူမျိုးတွေမှာတယောက်မှအဲ့ဒါကိုလုပ်ပေးမဲ့လူမရှိဘူးပေါ့နော်ဒီနေ့ကျွန်တော်အရန် emotion ဖြစ်သွားတယ်အတန်ကြီးကျဲသွားတယ်တကယ်ပါကျွန်တော် language ပိုင်းကလာတယ်ကျွန်တော်ကကရင် language ကို focus လုပ်ထားတယ်ကျွန်တော်ရဲ့ language ပေါ့နော် professional ကတော့foreign language ပေါ့နော်တခြားဘာသာစကားတစ်ခုဒါပေမဲ့ language ပိုင်းမှာကျွန်တော် passionate ဖြစ်တယ် language ကိုလေ့လာတယ်ဆိုတော့ minority language တွေဆိုရင်ကျွန်တော်ပိုလေ့လာတယ်ဆိုတော့ Eastern Bokin မှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်လည်းကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီနာကြီးနော်နာကြီးဆိုလို့ရှိရင်သူကအောက်ကအပွင့်လေးကိုသူကသဘောကျတာဒါပေမဲ့တကယ်တမ်းကျွန်တော်တို့ဟို document တွေမှာကြည့်လိုက်လို့ရှိရင်အပိတ်တွေကြီးပဲနောက် font မှာမရှိတာဟို font မရှိတော့သူကအပိတ်တွေပဲတုံးတော့နောက်ပေါက်လူငယ်တွေကြတော့မြန်မာနာကြီးကိုပဲသူကသဘောကျတယ်ရှေးလူကြီးတွေကြတော့နာကြီးအပွင့်ကိုသဘောကျတယ်အခုကုတ်ပွင့်ရထားတဲ့နာကြီးကိုသဘောကျတယ်အဲ့လိုမျိုးလေးတွေရှိရပေါ့နော်အများကြီးကျွန်တော်မှပြောစရာတွေတော့အများကြီးပေါ့နော်အခုကကျွန်တော်စကားနဲ့ပြောရတာဆိုတော့နည်းနည်းလေးဟိုကျွန်တော်အတွက်ကလေပုံနဲ့ပြလိုက်ရင်ပုံမြင်တာရယ်ဗျာဟိုစကားနဲ့ပြောရတာကြောင့်အဲ့လိုမြင်တာမနေဘူးဟုတ်ဗန်ပြောပါဟုတ်ရပါတယ်
Yeah, I mean, thank you. Yeah, there are so many complicated ideas when people are making fonts for different languages. It is possible with Unicode the way that it stands mainly at the moment. Things work for most of the languages that we have documentation about. And so, for example, this is some of the fonts that we're releasing soon. And so the Unicode charts, like you say, we've got Myanmar, and then we've got extended A, Myanmar extended B, and now C as well, with the recently encoded numbers for Wo and Pa'o. This is just a proofing document that we use to test our fonts. This is going to be open sourced in the future, so it'll be available for everybody to show kind of the ways that the different languages need to have different support. And so, for example, when I change this to Mon, like you mentioned, I'll see different characters are needed for Mon or for Sagor. It's a different set of characters. And sometimes the letters also need to change. Where did we have Arakanese, for example, Rakhine? Some of the letters also need to have different shapes to represent. You were talking about the Naji being open on the bottom. Well, Arakanese is open on the top. And so we can do this in a font. We can do it with language tags inside the font so that people who are writing in different languages get the glyphs that they prefer. And so I think when we were looking at where have we got Eastern Pole? I think we've got the open bottom on the Naji here is actually encoded as a separate character. So that's actually quite easy to support. We don't need to do any clever tricks in the font. But then when we come to something like Kamti, we see that most of the letters actually need to be different shapes or have these dots and stuff. This is possible on a font, but it's not really going to be possible in Word or in InDesign because we don't have options in those apps to change the language. Or if we do, it's probably not going to include Kamti language on the list. So there's a lot of work that needs to go in on the technical side, the developers of Windows, of Word, from Adobe to get InDesign to allow people to use these languages and to also have dictionary support for these languages and stuff. So you're absolutely right. It's really going to be quite an uphill battle to get full support. We can do it online. We can do it in the browser, which is how this is possible at the moment. It's fairly easy to set language tags in the HTML document. And I'm hoping when we open source this proofer, then we've got kind of the information that font developers need in one place. They can see, oh, we need to draw this style of character if we want to support this language. This is the key, and this is why it's taking me, 15 years to develop fonts that can support these languages, because there's not really the documentation that we need to show, okay, this language uses this character set, and these are the shapes that they prefer for each character. This is the information that I've been compiling over a really long time, and the research side of my work has come in really useful. But it's also showing stuff that we can't do. So, for example, in Southern Pa'o, we are missing. Okay, we've got some of the numbers are now encoded, but if I can find the wrong keyboard. Currently, I'm working on a proposal to encode some more characters for Pa'o, so that they can write the Kamdom version. The Southern Pa'o needs characters that are not in Unicode yet. And so that's kind of the other side, is not just documenting, but also adding in or proposing to Unicode to add in new characters where it's not possible at the moment. So yeah, there's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of different layers to all of these problems. If you have other things that I'm not aware of, please do let me know. Have a look at the fonts that I'm making. And if it doesn't work the way that you need it to, then absolutely tell me about it. And we can discuss okay, what do I need to do for this font then to include the correct way or a different way? There's often more than one correct way. So yeah, I'm very open to having feedback about any of this stuff so that we can make the best fonts possible. Okay, stop sharing. There's another question. I'm studying Korean. Hi, San. I'm studying Korean typography in my university. In the case of Korean typography, they make every letters, including letters combined with consonants and vowels. So in Myanmar typography, do you think making every letters would solve the problems? Regarding Myanmar fonts that can't be read in some programs, it would solve some problems, but I think it would create other problems, and it would mean an awful lot of work. So if we think about, so on that document I just showed, we had loads of different languages. There's about 25, 30 different languages that we can use Burmese script to write. So we would need to know all of the combinations of consonants and vowels and, well, medial consonants and conjunct consonants and tone marks. If you support every combination of a consonant with another consonant, with a medial, with a vowel, with a tone mark, you get millions and millions of combinations. I've tried. to look at the number there, you get literally something like 13 million different possibilities. A font can only support 65,000 glyphs. So you would run into difficulties if you tried to support every combination. So then you would need to think about, okay, well, which combinations really occur in each language? So not just the theoretical combinations, but the ones that you have evidence. This would mean more research to find out which languages use which consonants and vowels in which combinations. So that would be a lot of work, and I don't know if it would actually solve the problems that you want it to solve. So that is an approach that people used to use especially in Khmer fonts, because Khmer used to have similar problems with Unicode. I think really the solution is to make apps support Burmese script better. And I've been discussing these problems with Adobe and Microsoft for years and years, and they have made improvements. And so it's just kind of a slow process that they have other priorities as well. They're working on so many different things. Burmese does tend to get left behind a little bit with other languages, other scripts too. But I think once they understand the problems and once they have time to figure out what needs to be done, that is really the most future-proof solution. So I like your suggestion, but I think it's not very practical with everything considered. Next question. Can you share your research process on typography and languages? So this is about the manuscript studies and linking up with communities. When I'm thinking about languages that I mean, I don't speak any of these languages in Burma, but I can read the I know the alphabets, I know the letters and what they sound like. When I'm approaching a new language that I haven't seen before, like the Shani or the Taikamti, the key for me is I need to have some kind of visual resources so I can get an idea. What do the characters look like? What's the style that is used? And then go through the process of converting that into some kind of typeface. The way that I do that is I'll just search. I mean, I'm really comprehensive in my approach to research. I will look and look and look for stuff, so that I know that I don't know. I want to see as much as possible before I make any decisions. And so I'll look online, I'll search through Google, I'll search through Facebook, I'll search through Instagram, see if there is anybody posting pictures of their language that I can then discuss with them, or that I can show to academics who do know the languages or who might have links with the communities. I think, like I said in the presentation, I find Facebook is a really, really useful research tool. I don't really like it for social purposes, but I love how useful it is to get in contact with tiny little communities in Burma or Northeast India or Thailand, and find and share ideas and insights. And normally it only takes one or two people who are interested, and then I'll be able to find out all the answers that I need. It's just finding that key person for each language, that either if they know the answers themselves or if they can ask other people in their communities, you just have to find that key person. And so I've been very reliant on building those bridges with people in academia or people in communities who speak different languages, and then asking them, okay, well, what about if we do it this way, or is that way better, or what do you think of this, or have you got any examples where I can see this particular combination of letters? But also spending hours and hours looking through manuscripts to find, okay, I need to find Naji, or I need to find a particular number so that I know how I can represent it. And some of these letters are not common, and so you literally have to scroll through pages and pages of manuscripts to find, there's the letter that I'm looking for. I'm lucky that I'm interested in the research side, because if I wasn't interested in that, it would be incredibly boring, and probably most people would find it very boring to look like with eagle eyes looking through manuscripts trying to find particular characters. So it's a combination of kind of doing my own research, but also kind of discussing with anybody who knows anything about different languages. Nice question, thank you. Okay, I think, is that all the questions? I think we've come to the end, right?
မေကုမေးမယ်လို့ရှိသေးလားမသိတရားဘယ်လောက်ဖြစ်ဖြစ်မရှိတော့ကျွန်တော်ရက်လို့ရခဏနော်
နက်ပြန်လည်းရှိသေးတာ
Okay.
Okay, so today is a nice I think.
Okay, I think, let's leave it there for today, and then we come back tomorrow for some more presentation and more questions, hopefully.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. See you. Yay. Excellent.